let's talk about the Bible. My name is Brian Choi.
I'm John O.
And we're very glad that you joined us today. Today our study will be on the book of Revelation chapter 10. And so we're going to see how this chapter is very relevant for us today as we open this book. So if you guys have your Bibles, please join us and turn to Revelation chapter 10. So John, what do you think about this chapter?
For me, it was reading it for the first time was significant for me because you know, being born and raised as an Adventist, you hear about 1844 and the expectation, prediction of Christ coming back, and you know there was this great disappointment, and it can really an Adventist can really question those things and why were they wrong. And so this chapter was significant for me because it really emphasizes that prophecy even foretold this slight disappointment in the future.
Yeah, I think a lot of people will be wondering about that too, John. Like a lot of people will be asking, like, is what we really believe as Adventist relevant? Is it really something that we can rely on? And I think a lot of people are questioning that nowadays. And so I think this chapter is worth studying to kind of answer those questions. So let's take a look at Revelation chapter 10, and we're going to take a look at verse 1. So Revelation chapter 10, 1 through 3 reads, "And I saw another mighty angel come down from heaven, clothed with a cloud, and a rainbow was upon his head. And his face was as it were the sun, and his feet as pillars of fire. And he had in his hand a little book opened, and he set his right foot upon the sea, and his left foot on the earth. And he cried with a loud voice, as when a lion roareth, and when he cried, 7 thunders uttered their voices." So John, we see here in these 3 texts that we are introduced to an angel, a particular angel, like a mighty angel actually, that comes down from heaven, and it gives all these descriptions. Clothed with a cloud, a rainbow upon his head, his face as it were the sun, feet as pillars of fire. Now, people reading this may be wondering, who is this angel talking? Who are we talking about here? Who is this angel?
Yeah, you know, just based on the description that Revelation 10 begins with, it reminds me a lot of Daniel chapter 10, 10 verses 5 and 6, where they have a similar description of a man. And we know that this person is Christ himself, but you know, I'll read it really quick. It's Daniel 10 verses 5 and 6. It says, "I lifted my eyes and looked, and behold, a certain man clothed in linen." This man is also known as the man that was clothed in linen, whose waist was girded with gold of Uphaz. His body was like beryl, his face like the appearance of lightning, his eyes like the torches of fire, his arms and feet burnished bronze in color, and the sound of his words like the voice of a multitude. So I think here we have a cross-reference of who this person might be. I think it's the angel of Christ.
Yeah, I think you're right, because also we see in Revelation there's allusions to these characteristics of coming with a cloud. We see in Revelation chapter 1, it talks about Christ coming in a cloud. We also see that there's a rainbow upon his head, which represents the covenant that Christ has made with God's people. And also the description also in Revelation, when John sees Jesus, says that his face was like as it were the sun, his feet as pillars of fire. So we see obviously all these characteristics, these descriptions actually represent none other than Jesus Christ himself.
I think it's important too because this is the person who is speaking to Daniel. Is none other than Christ. So that's kind of like the foundation and the introduction to this chapter. Is Christ himself is speaking here.
So that's a very good point. So let's go ahead and continue reading. Maybe John, you can read verse 4. Probably verse 4 through 6.
Okay. So chapter 10, verses 4 through 6, it reads, "Now when the 7 thunders uttered their voices, I was about to write, but I heard a voice from heaven saying to me, Seal the things which the 7 thunders uttered, and do not write them." Verse 5, "The angel whom I saw standing on the sea and on the land raised up his hand in heaven, and swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created heaven and the things that are in it, the earth and the things that are in it, and the sea and the things that are in it, that there should be no delay no longer." So So it's really interesting that, you know, from the first verse to where we've read so far, right? We know Christ is the man with the book, which we will talk about in a little bit. But in verses 4 through 6, we talk about these 7 thunders that are told to seal up the things that they have spoken to Daniel. So I'm trying to figure out, what are these 7 thunders? Who are the 7 thunders?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think it's just by reading it we can't really tell what it is. But you know, it's very interesting. Like John, he sees this he hears the thunders, right? Like these thunders come from where, John?
In this,
according to this text,
from heaven.
From heaven, right? And it's when this angel cries with a loud voice, right? And when he cries with a loud voice, these 7 thunders utter their voices, according to verse 3.
Okay.
And so I don't know what the 7 thunders could represent, but it kind of brings me to the story of the baptism of Jesus. Remember that? When Jesus was baptized, the sky opened up, and God the Father said, "This is my beloved Son, who I'm well pleased."
Right.
And the gospel writers, some of them, I don't remember who, but they said that when they heard the voice, they said some heard a voice, and others they heard thunder. So some people actually understood the voice as a voice, and others understood it as thunder. They couldn't understand it. And so I think when it's talking about the 7 thunders, it's talking about something that could not be understood to John at that time. Because I believe that maybe God is giving us something that it was meant for us in our time to be understood, that John at his time could not understand.
Is this the reason why the things that were spoken, the thunder that was spoken from heaven, is that why it was sealed up? Is that Daniel had no understanding at that time?
Yeah, I believe so. I believe Daniel didn't have an understanding because in the end of Daniel chapter 12, God says that those things should be sealed up. And later on, we're going to be learning later on in this chapter that now it's going to be unsealed. So this is very exciting. At the end of the book of Daniel, it's sealed for Daniel not to know because it doesn't pertain to him. But it's now unsealed. It's like a time capsule. It's like opened up for us to be revealed to us at this time with this very special message for this present time.
Right. I think it's significant too in verse 2. We notice that this man we've talked about is Christ, but he's holding a book, and that book is now open.
Right.
So I think the significance of it being open is that it's for the people in the end times.
That's right.
That the message, the thunder, is now open.
Yeah, that's right. Which is exciting because it shows that Jesus Christ himself is actually giving us a revelation of what's to come to the people in the last days.
Right.
Which includes you and me.
Right.
It's interesting, if we notice verses 5 through 6, it's actually talking about this angel who stands upon the sea and upon the earth, and he's lifting his hand towards heaven. The symbology of that is that this message that this angel is giving will actually stretch across the seas, stretch across the lands where all people can hear this kind of message. And verse 6 is saying, "And swear by him that liveth forever and ever, who created heaven and the things that there are therein, the earth and the things therein are, and the sea and the things therein are, that there should be time no longer." So it's pointing to God as what?
As the creator.
As a creator, exactly. Yeah, it's talking about God as a creator. And so he's swearing by God that God himself, the creator, is actually allowing these things to be revealed to us. Right? And so this kind of takes me back to the 3 angels' messages. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
The first angel's message where it talks about
take the message to the world.
Right, to the whole world, every kindred, tongue, people.
Right.
And so this is kind of like a precursor to Revelation chapter 14, I think.
Yeah. If I could just add
Sure.
to that, in the last part of verse 6, we talked about, as you were talking about, he's standing over the earth and the heavens, and he has this hand raised, and this message, the book that is open, is to go to the whole world. And it says, I find it interesting that in the end of verse 6, it says that there should be delay no longer. So the time should end, but Christ, or John, the writer of this book, acknowledges that there is supposed to be a delay. And I think oftentimes, for me, I know when I studied this chapter 10 for the first time, what really inspired me was, time prophecy finishes after 1844, right? As far as time prophecy in the Bible.
Right.
And so sometimes you can wonder, like, why is there a delay? Why has Christ not come back yet? I think people can question that. In fact, I think some people can use that as ammunition against the Adventists and against, not even just Adventists, but people that believe in time prophecy.
Right.
But here we see specifically that there was an intentional delay in that time. I just wanted to highlight that.
Which transitions well to the next text. It says, "But in the days of the voice of the seventh angel, when he shall begin to sound, the mystery of God should be finished, as he hath declared to his servants, the prophets." And now this is where we get to the interesting part, verse 8. It says, "And the voice which I heard from heaven spoke unto me again, and said, Go and take the little book which is open in the hand of the angel which standeth upon the sea and upon the earth." So, according to this text, this gives us more information. It shows that this angel is standing over the sea and the earth, who has his hand towards heaven. On his other hand, he has a book. And they're telling John to take this book from the hand of the angel. So, what do you think this book represents?
I think the book represents the significance of it being open. Is a message for the end time people. Just like the thunders, the thunders had uttered the things that they said that was supposed to be sealed up. I think it's that end time message.
So it's almost like a book is open, ready for you to look at, to see what is revealed in that book, the contents of that book. So this is very exciting for John to actually be able to see what the contents of this particular book is that the angel's holding out in his hand. So, John, why don't you go ahead and read the next verse?
Okay, verse 9.
Yes.
"So I went to the angel and said to him, Give me the little book. And he said to me, Take and eat it, and it will make your stomach bitter, but it will be as sweet as honey in your mouth."
Verse 10.
Verse 10, "Then I took the little book out of the angel's hand and ate it, and it was as sweet as honey in my mouth. But when I had eaten it, my stomach became bitter."
Okay, so it's very interesting because we see here that they tell John to do what with the book?
To eat the book.
Eat the book. Can you imagine eating the book? Now, why would they tell John to do such a thing? What's the significance about eating a book, an open book, in fact?
Since the book represents this end time message, I think to eat the book is to take in the word, right? Is to ingest and heed the word, the message within the book. And I think there's other references in the Bible where. I know, like in the sanctuary, bread is considered the body of Christ or the word of life. So in that aspect, we can ingest bread as we ingest the word.
Also, I believe in Psalms it says, taste and see that the Lord is good.
That's right.
So it's telling us that we can actually taste the words of God, or in a sense, spiritually, not literally, but in a sense that we can just take it in within ourselves, and it will be good for us. And according to this text, John eats it, and sure enough, it has a sweet taste in his mouth. But then what happens after that, John? What happens after he takes it into his mouth?
His stomach becomes bitter.
Yeah, his stomach becomes bitter.
And indigestion.
Some sort of like indigestion or heartburn or something. But like, what would that mean? Like, why would God tell John to eat this book that's sweet in the mouth, but also bitter in the stomach? This is very unusual. It's like almost like, why would God allow John to have this experience? That's something that a lot of people may be wondering.
The part in verse 6 where we talked about the delay, that the message when first taken, right, assuming the message is Christ is coming back, is an awesome message, and it's a message that is sweet to our taste. But I think the delay that these people experienced had a bitter taste to the message that they first received, and perhaps this is the connection to that event.
The sweet and the bitter experience that John experiences actually represents an experience that some people have experienced when they were actually eating the book themselves.
Right.
And if we study history, we actually understand that there was a group of people called the Millerites, led by none other than William Miller. And William Miller, he was actually studying the Bible, and he was studying particularly the books of Daniel and Revelation. And as he was studying those two books, he was actually understanding, he was unlocking the prophetic messages within these books. And as he was understanding these messages, he was called to preach this message to those around him. And as people heard this message, people were like strangely warmed in their hearts. They were understanding that these prophecies were actually pointing to something significant, which is Christ's coming. Right? He was actually calculating that the world would end when Jesus comes at 1844.
That's right.
Yeah. And so we see that when 1844 came, many people were just gathered, ready for Jesus' soon return. But what happened after that, John?
That is what we Seventh-day Adventists would consider the great disappointment.
The great disappointment. Yeah.
Christ did not return at that time.
Right. So this was the bitter experience that these people went through. And all these people, can you imagine, all these people forsaking everything, knowing for sure, without a doubt, that Jesus would be coming. But when Jesus didn't come, it was a bitter experience, a disappointment, the great disappointment of 1844, October 22nd. And so we see that this is the same experience that was actually foretold of in Revelation chapter 10. And so we see here that the seven thunders was actually closed off to us. Because John could have actually written what would happen. But
that's right.
The seven thunders were closed off for us so that we would not understand. Like, it's almost as God purposely covered that complete truth for us, almost as if God wanted us to go through that great disappointment. Now, why would God want us to go through that great disappointment, some of you may ask? Well, I think there's many reasons, but I think one I could think of is, can you imagine, like, being in 1844? People en masse were actually gathering to prepare for Jesus to come up from the heavens. People were leaving their jobs behind. People were leaving their farms behind. People were leaving everything behind because there's no need for it because Jesus is coming.
Right.
And so when Jesus didn't come, imagine how everybody must have felt. This great disappointment. And people reacted in different ways. Some people got very jaded and discouraged and they felt humiliated by the whole experience and they just forsook the movement. Other people went the other route and they became fanatics and they actually thought, oh, Jesus came, his coming was a spiritual coming. He did come, but it was a spiritual coming. Things like that. And there were others, a select few, that were actually diving into the Bible and saying, where did we go wrong? What did we miss? Like, what was wrong with the way that we interpreted the Bible? And so this actually resulted into a deeper study where they prayed earnestly. They wanted to learn more about what was wrong with the prophets. They knew that there was truth to this, but there was something wrong. What did they have wrong with this truth, John?
So just to reiterate what you were saying, is that this great disappointment actually had a very positive conclusion, and that it drove the people to study the Word deeper, and it led them to discover the sanctuary message. Maybe you can just recap for us really quick.
Yeah, sure.
What they discovered and how.
Yes, this drove, like you said, John. It drove them to study the Bible more deeper, and as they realized that they were actually right on the prophecy of what things would happen, but they got the event wrong. And so they thought that Jesus would come at 1844, but in actuality, another event happened in heaven where Jesus was actually entering the most holy place. And so there's a whole other study on that, but we don't have time to go into that. But the point is that the seven thunders, the reason why God allowed this thing to be shrouded is to actually, in a sense, weed out the sincere believers that were really searching for the truth, those who were really searching to find what God had in store for them. And so, as a result, it's interesting. Verse 11, why don't you read that for us, John?
Sure. It says in the very last verse of chapter 10, "And he said to me, you must prophesy again, and many peoples, nations, tongues, and kings."
And that's very interesting because, you know, here are these people, this movement that actually told everyone Jesus is coming soon. Jesus didn't come. They lost credibility,
sure,
right? And like, you wouldn't feel like you'd want to share that message again. People
sure.
would not believe you.
Sure.
But what does it tell us to do? It says prophesy again, right? And who are we to prophesy to?
Because peoples, nations, tongues, and kings.
Right,
so
peoples,
everyone.
nations, tongues, and kings. It's also a universal message,
Right.
And so I see somewhere else in the Bible, in Revelation, another universal message that's similar to this one.
Right.
That is shown later on.
Right.
In Revelation 14:9, it talks about the first angel, where I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. So what is being preached is the everlasting gospel.
That's right.
And so this is what we are supposed to prophesy again. This is what God's last day people and the last day movement is supposed to bring this message to light to those around us.
Yeah. I think it's also important to note that I think in prophecy, but even the whole Bible, there's always it should always somehow point back to Christ and the gospel, and He's taken this disappointment, but this delay, it was prophesied in Revelation 10.
That's right.
And He tells us, even after this disappointment, to take this message, this open book, to all the people. And that message obviously being that Christ has come, He came, and He had victory over the enemy.
Yes.
And we can claim that victory for ourselves as well too. And we are commissioned to go share that message to the world.
Exactly. Well, thank you for joining us. We hope you learned something today. If you have any other questions, please leave a comment below or email us, and maybe we could get to your question in the future. Thank you for joining us.